Morning and welcome to another great week of the morning meeting. Dan Turrentine and I are here. Mark Halperin is frozen, literally. We are working on it. He is traveling, but he will join us shortly. We've got a special guest today in light of the California wildfires in the LA region. Dr. Patrick Soon-Shiong, the chairman and owner of the LA Times, is going to be joining us in just a minute while we work on Mark's internet. Dan is going to kick us off with a rendition of today's daybook. Dan.
Yeah, apparently I didn't fail last week because I got asked to do it again. But I did not get the memo to wear my earth tones today, so we need to coordinate better.
I'll send you the memo.
Okay. All right, we're going to kick it off. Speaking of the wildfires, the president and vice president will convene today to do a full or to receive a full briefing on what's happening in Los Angeles. There will be a pool spray at some point. It'll be interesting to see how those two talk about this. Donald Trump has no known public schedule at this time, although I have a feeling between his nominees hitting the Hill this week and what's going on in LA, we will hear from him at some point today.
He had a very active weekend at Mar-a-Lago. Lots of folks down there. Fetterman down there, House Republicans, Freedom Caucus, and then the group, what do you call it? The SALT group, the state and local tax deduction, New York, New Jersey, California. Anyway.
Sean, remind people, in 16, he met with nominees at Bedminster. But he did not do anything of this kind, right?
No. So we went back and forth. You remember those iconic shots of people going in and out of the elevator at Trump Tower, the front door of Bedminster, his club in New Jersey. I wish we had done it in Mar-a-Lago. But anyway, that's it. And it was much more public and showy, right? We had a pool camera outside of both locations. The press was staked out so they could see people coming in and out. This is obviously a very, very different scene.
Yeah, and it seems to be that it's getting well received by people who go down there. JD Vance also no known public schedule at this time, although I do wonder, and our local correspondent on the ground in his neighborhood may know if he is in DC with these nominees up there. Perhaps he will be seen or heard from on Capitol Hill.
I didn't drive carpool this morning, so I did not see. And just so people know, you can tell whether he's home or not by the size of the security footprint gets larger, much larger when he's home versus not.
The Congress today is back in session this week. The Senate will take up the Laken-Riley Act. It'll be very interesting to see what happens there, particularly after last week with so many Democrats at least voting to bring the bill to the floor. I do imagine you will see a significant number of Democrats vote for the final bill, although there are now some issues that are being discussed about the actual legislation that we'll see kind of what happens.
And by the way, I think, I said this last week, we've heard nothing from the Biden administration. They need 7 Democrats if all Republicans support it, which we believe they will. I think they've crossed that threshold, but it'll be interesting to see which Democrats don't vote now, because now you look like the outsider. And then will the Biden administration make a comment about this?
I would look at the 2026 map for people curious about Senate Democrats that maybe.
Well, not just the map, but you saw both senators from Arizona. I think it's real border states, because all states are border states now, but real border states geographically, I think, are going to have a hard time saying that they didn't support this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think this, of all the issues, this one boxes Democrats in, and they know they need to change. Here he is, just in time. We finished locker room.
Sorry about that.
By the way, Mark, an official happy birthday.
Yes.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Had a wonderful celebration this weekend. Thank you all. All right. Thank you all for joining. I apologize. I had a little technical difficulties because I was doing the great traditional thing. I was toggling between Wi-Fi and the using my iPad as my hotspot. I don't recommend that. Don't try it. Did you guys already promote our live event?
Oh, we saved the best for last, Mark.
All right. You just so we're gonna make a jump to shark.
Welcome to a very special episode of the morning meeting. I'm Mark Halperin in Washington, D.C. And here's the first thing I want to tell you. Live event. We're doing our second in-person event. You can join us coming up February 2nd, Sunday, 5 p.m. Eastern Time. You can buy tickets now. We just put them on sale late last night. Go to twoway.tv to buy tickets. Dan, Sean, and I, all in Washington. We'll do a show. There'll be some special guests. The two-way community will be there. More information you can get and tickets 2way.tv. We'll see you then. All right. Today, Sean already ran through the day book, I gather. So today, Dan did. Fine. Good. Guys, welcome in. We've not talked as much about the fires as we might have. It's been obviously a political story, and it's a story for the country. And so we're very pleased today to have a special guest to join us to go through his perspective on the fires and a whole lot more. If you just go on resume, one of the most impressive people in America, extremely successful businessman, doctor, now publisher of a newspaper, and he's done a whole bunch of other things as well. But it's an opportunity for us to learn about how the LA Times, because he owns the LA Times and he's the editor, the executive in charge of the LA Times, how the LA Times is dealing with this massive challenge. And over the last 20 years, Los Angeles has had a lot of very big stories over the years. Of course, this one is as big as any other. So if we could bring Patrick in, that would be outstanding. And we're going to ask him about his newspaper and the coverage. So go ahead, folks, go ahead and bring him in. Standing by. I'll remind you while we bring him in, if you want to be in the conversation, please raise your electronic hand, and we'd welcome the opportunity. You get the opportunity after Sean, Dan, and I talk a little bit. Pat, first of all, are you Pat or Patrick?
Either way, Patrick is fine. Hi, Sean.
All right. Patrick, good morning.
How are you? Good to see you.
Thank you for joining us. Now, I was given 17 different ways to pronounce your last name. I'm going right to the source. What's your preferred way to have your last name pronounced?
It's Soon-Shiong. Patrick Soon-Shiong.
Soon-Shiong. Thank you for joining us.
It's easier than Spicer.
Yeah, it is a little easier, Spicer.
A lot easier than Turrentine.
It's easier than some of the. I will say it's easier than some of the names I've been called. How's that?
You're great to join us. We have a million questions. I'll go first, and I'll turn you over to Sean and Dan, and then we'll open it up to the community. The first is, how is the paper that you own, Los Angeles Times, mobilizing to cover this big story? What are you doing? Because obviously, your reporters on the ground, many of them are impacted as well.
Yeah. Well, I'm so pleased to say that it really came to 24/7. I mean, I think what's exciting, pointed out that we won one of the papers that really covered this fully, and I think what was really important, we provided information to the community 24/7. So we've mobilized, and ironically, we were mobilizing before even the fire to create the paper into the media platform. So what we had created is cameras around the city, and we're quietly going to go live stream in February when we were beta testing for the last 6 months, and we were able to turn those cameras on and actually watch real time the fire. We actually have an LA Times studio, and we launched LA Times Studio earlier than we had anticipated so that we could have 24/7. And then we partnered with Spectrum to create news, real-time news. So I'm really proud of the team that really, came to the challenge. And our photojournalists were out there, braving, the fires and trying to get information to the community.
How do you prepare, because this is going to go on for a decade, how do you now reorient your journalism, and how do you balance it between holding public officials accountable, but also wanting to give people encouragement?
Well, I think the first episodes, as you see maybe from the Twitter feeds that I went out, is we needed to hold people accountable right up front, and we did. But I think we're now beyond that. I think we now need to go look into the recovery mode, really more importantly, recovery mode for the community. I think while people sort of was focusing on the Palisades and the Brentwood and the UCLA area, and the people the common people working in the street day to day, paycheck to paycheck, they destroyed. I mean, if you look at the number of houses, so this is really why we need to have truly a recovery act almost. So yesterday I launched and had wonderful calls from both leaders as well as people who could practically help the regrowth, the rebirth, and recovery of LA. And so we're about to create a council of effective leaders that actually can really understand logistics, jobs, job opportunities, growth, issues to fight through the red tape. And I had a wonderful reception yesterday of people calling in and said, we want in onto this council.
So is this a private public or just private group?
I think, look, at the end of the day, look, I'm as skeptical as most about government efficiencies. This is going to be a privately, organization of both leaders and people in the community who said, tell us what you need, we'll show you how we can help. And we really need to look at it from a strategic perspective rather than a tactical perspective. As you could see, this is now a decade of rebuilding. This is like 10 9/11s happening. The amount of fire is equivalent to the size of Manhattan. So it's massive destruction that's gone on.
Last one for me on the fires, and then we'll stay with the fires for a little bit, and then we want to talk to you about some other stuff. So we'll double back in another round, and then again we'll get questions. And if you would like to ask Patrick a question, please raise your hand, and we'll get to you all in a bit. What's the responsibility of the paper now? What would you tick off as the things the paper is responsible for doing during this story, during this crisis?
I think it's in an interesting way, sadly, and it is sad, that this fire has given us a wake-up call as a paper. We have responsibility to the entire community, whether you're left, right, whether you're Democrat, Republican. Really, our obligation is to provide, inform, and inspire, educate, and almost create the paper as a media utility. I know that sounds strange, but a utility in which you could go there for information that you could get that will help your day-to-day life, but also have a paper of national importance. I'm about to launch what we call the editorial board of contributors as well as the editorial board. We think we need to inform. I will personally start announcing a health podcast because, the medical discussions and scientific discussions is really got up to most lay people. And we need to explain things in terms that the man in the street can understand. I grew up in LA. My kids were born in LA. I love LA. I'm an Angelino. I'm committed to Los Angeles. And I think there could be no important voice really for the Angelinos as the paper. And then secondly, for the nation.
Okay, Sean.
The first question, first of all, thank you for joining us and what you're doing out there. I got a lot to get to, and obviously, as Mark said before we end this conversation, I want to talk to you about cancer and MAHA because I think it's obviously something big in your wheelhouse. But first and foremost, can you give us some sense of you mentioned the geographic scope of the devastation, but how people are doing? I just don't. I asked somebody the other day who was affected by this, like, where do you go? Right? I mean, do you just drive to a hotel? What resources are available to people when when you go through a hurricane or something, you might buckle down or go out of town while it passes through and then come back and start to rebuild. But the sheer amount of devastation that has occurred is, to me, unfathomable. How somebody goes back and says, I have nothing. I don't have clothes. I've lost everything in life. I just don't understand, like, what are the resources that are available to people? How are they dealing with this? Are they just moving out of the area and going to stay with people? But you can't just come back after, like, it's like a snowstorm or a thunderstorm. Your entire community is wiped out. And so can you give us some sense of the scope of what's going on in people's lives and what resources are available?
Sean, I think that's an amazing question because, people don't realize it's not like you move out of your house and you can come back. There's nothing to come back to. They've lost all their memories. They've lost all their belongings. They've lost all their clothing, all their money, everything. So we're about to start a series called Heartbreak in LA, where we're about to show really how it affects the man in the street, the people. But what's exciting is we've seen sort of how people come together and actually helped each other. Even with hugs and the typical American, and this is when I came to this country. It's really a very giving, helpful country, and so the resources that people have come to put together with the water, food, blankets, clothing, that's happening now. But you're right. Where do they go? And what's very sad, I've had friends call me, frankly, is they can't even rent a house because there's now rental gouging, which is outrageous. But that's what's going on. Look, we had to evacuate, and we're fortunate, and we can go and evacuate to somewhere else. But most people, you're right. It's not like going down the street. We're talking about miles and miles and miles all the way down into Southern California and up into Northern California. Where do they go? And that's why I'm saying I'm so worried about what this has done, not only to the people, but the economy. How do they come back to work? How do they come back to live? And that's why I said, Mark, this council has to be a private council as well as the community to find out how do we help and how do we get quick recovery for LA.
Are you able to tell us, let me just ask about, sorry, Sean, are you able to tell us any of the people who will be involved besides you at the council, or is that still in formation?
Well, I think they called me so I can share with that. You know, people like Bob Bradway, the CEO of Amgen, a wonderful, wonderful man. I've known him for years and years, and people now running the Olympics, so the chairman of the Olympic Committee. And look, we got 3 years before the Olympics are coming. It's like one of the most important things. And really strategic thinkers, somebody I sat on the board with at Rand and was ex-McKinsey. But now we need to also reach out to people in the community and say who can come in. You know, I tweeted yesterday something really practical. You can't have fire without fuel, meaning that you need to clean the brush. Well, guess what they do in Laguna? They use goats. I mean, think about that. $400 an acre. That's a practical solution. Why don't we have goats roaming the hills of the Palisades? And you can't fight the fire without water. But guess what? Every year we have this massive rain and we just let it run off into the ocean. So these are very practical, straightforward. Look, how do we prevent this in the future? And then what I'm really worried about is, you know, you heard about the 9/11 and how it was cancer producing with all the toxins that came out of the buildings. I mean, there's asbestos, lead, mercury, all the batteries, the cars that got burnt up. Even the retardant itself are carcinogenic. And we'll talk about MAHA, but now this really emphasizes the need for the clean air and everything else. So the problems are enormous, but they really require strategic and tactical thinking and real leadership and more importantly, efficiency of execution.
Sean, sorry, go ahead.
So the last thing I just want to, you mentioned your tweets and you've been very clear that there needs to be accountability. And I know that during a difficult time like this, it's tough to talk about the politics and the policies, but I think it's hard not to. How do you think, I mean, I have seen more people that tweet and speak openly about the competence and the accountability among public officials in a way that I haven't from certain groups and people that normally wouldn't say certain things about the mayor or the governor. How much are they, in your opinion, to blame for the policies, whether it's things like the brush, the fire department, et cetera, et cetera? Because I feel like some of the, you know, there's only so much you can do during the crisis, but I sort of, at least from out here on the East Coast, have seen more people in the LA community that probably were very supportive of Gavin Newsom and Karen Bass in the past, openly be critical of both of the two. Where is that line? Where is that line right now in the middle of a crisis, and how much are they holding them accountable?
Well, first of all, we'll accept some blame, right? So at the LA Times, we endorse Karen Bass. I think right now in front, that's a mistake, and we admit that. So I thought it was very important early on for me to come out. And I think we were one of the few to say competence matters. We got like maybe 20, 23 million views to show how that was really dear to the heart of most people, whether you're right or left. And it's an interesting thing is that maybe we should think about how we elect people on the basis of, did they actually run a job? Did they actually make a payroll? Do they understand what it is? And rather than having professional politicians whose only job is really to run for office. There's nothing, I'm not trying to be disparaging, but I think we're at the stage now of the nation and the world, and there's many things we'll talk about even in healthcare, that you really need people to understand, well, how it affects a man in the street, you know, how it affects the working type of person. And I think President Trump in this election has understood that, and he's become truly a Republican Party, as you said, has become the Democratic Party in terms of addressing the problems of the man in the street. So competence absolutely matters. And I'm glad that that's been taken up as almost a meme now, that competence matters.
Dan.
Thank you.
Yeah, to pick up on that, I'm in New York City, and I think similar in Los Angeles, there's been kind of an under the surface simmering of public frustration on crime and safety and homelessness. Do you think that sediment has contributed to your point about competence, that people are coming out in frustration, or do you think this is really just solely about the fires at this point?
No, I think it affects everything. When you think about even the homelessness in Los Angeles, we spend billions now, and it's grown. And it's not about money; it's about effective, execution. This idea of the reservoirs and the valves and the power, and this is where it really irks me, because those are not excuses. We've known about those things. These are not surprises. Yet, and in fact, the reports on it, multiple reports, 10 years old, nobody's done anything about it. Now, is it just because that's infrastructure nobody sees and therefore politically not something to talk about? I mean, for us to spend, $100,000 to put somebody in a hotel and say that's a solution for the homeless, that's crazy. But that's what we do, as not we, but our politicians sort of see the solutions, the short-term solution. So yeah, I think if you have somebody who's understood how to run a business, there's nothing bad about running a business. You actually have to make a payroll. In order to make a payroll, you actually have to understand logistics, and you actually understand how to make things happen on behalf of the people that you're actually trying to support in the payroll. And that's what I mean about competence, somebody who's actually done something. If you look at the Singapore model, the Singaporean government, I don't know if you call it public-private, but the people running that government, and they have nothing. They have a city, and yet it's one of the most effective cities. So we have an amazing opportunity. We have more resources than anybody in the world, if only we had competent leaders.
As you think about the rebuilding, and you said that for now it's a mix of private individuals, do you guys want government officials at the table at first? Obviously, at some point they'll need to be a part of the process, but do you guys want to do this more from the private sector to start?
I think we need to do the private sector, to be honest with you. I don't think, again, I'm not here to disparage whoever's in power right now, but I don't see competence in power right now. And I don't know if really we don't want lip service. I think what we want to do is actually get solutions. So my idea is to bring people together, and what's excited me is that everybody wants to come to the table to help and to help rebuild. So I think we should start initially with this council, and the LA Times will host the council, and really focus on the entire area. More importantly, we have to focus on the local people, the mental health issue, the health issues, how to make the schools, the kids, where do they go to school? The kids in our schools rely on the luncheon in order to feed them. Otherwise, they go hungry. Think about that. So these are the kinds of things that I think on a very practical basis we need to sort of figure out. But I'm a little jaded about bringing our local officials into the meeting.
Thank you for your leadership. Yep.
Yeah. Let's talk about healthcare. There aren't a lot of people in America who have your combination, your doctor, and have succeeded as a practitioner of medicine. You also have succeeded as a business person, understanding the market for medical advances, and you care about public life. There just aren't a lot of people like that. So what would you say to the incoming Trump administration? Should there be their priorities regarding the health of Americans?
I am really, really excited about this next 4 years, because I think for the first time, and again, we don't want to harp on competence, but the first time we have people who understand what it means to actually get things done. More importantly, get things done. So let me give you some history, right? And you saw President Obama and President Trump at the funeral of President Carter. I presented to President Obama the thing called the rocket ship. During that time, this idea was, Mark, if I were to ask you, where's your medical records? You know where it is, and you know who has them, and how do they work? And if you go out of town and something happens, can somebody access them? And you know that most Americans say, absolutely not. We have no idea. So when I presented to President Obama, and I said, listen, these things about the medical records, what we really need is an interconnected real-time database of your activity in real time across the board, because you need to be considered an astronaut. Think about if every American is considered an astronaut and we can monitor in real time what's going on with you. And I presented this whole plan to him, we call the rocket ship. We spent, unfortunately, nobody listened, and we spent $40 billion spending money on funding electronic medical records, all which don't talk to each other, of old software that is not integrated. And I said to them, they're going to create concrete on this planet. If you now go to the ICU and you're in the emergency room and you want to be monitored, but your cardiologist is on the road somewhere, he can't see what's going on with you. If we could build a system that can monitor you real time wherever you are, guess what? We now have quietly for the last decade built that. And we have now, I think, 170 so hospitals where just with a click of your phone, we can see what's happening to you in ICU in real time. So the idea of healthcare, there's so much, it's so complex. Only way I can sort of deal with this is in a long form. And that's why at LA Times, you're going to create a podcast called Health Decoded and try and break this down. But if you look at the perverse nature, I got into trouble at the many years ago when I wrote in the Huffington Post that the Affordable Care Act was neither affordable nor accountable. I didn't mean that in a political sense. It was neither affordable nor accountable in the sense that what we're going to do, we won't be able to monitor outcomes. So let me give you a root cause of why Medicare costs is growing. Let me give you a root cause of, I know this sounds nuts, but we spend more money than any country on the planet, and we have the lowest longevity rate compared to even Europe, Italy, and you ask the question, why? And we mix up the idea of health insurance as health care. So look at the story of health insurance, and let me give you the perverse nature. So now we have a thing called Medicare Advantage, or Medicare. And guess what? The insurance companies bid for that. They get the per patient per month contract from Medicare. Let's say it's $1,000 per patient per month. And their job, therefore, is to look after that patient. They then subcontract that to doctors at, let's say, $50 per patient per month. And guess what they ask the doctors to do? They don't ask the doctors to make sure the patient's healthy. They ask the doctors to upcode. Think about that. There's a thing called code gaps, that if you're pre-diabetic and you become a diabetic while the doctor, they want to know that. Guess why? Because then retroactively, they go back to Medicare and say, you need to pay me more for that patient. And they get paid more. So think about that. We have incentivized upcoding doctors, it is not their fault, who are paid by these insurance companies to perversely, better for them if the patient's sick than the patient's healthy. That's what I mean by sick care versus health care. In an instant, this administration can change that in an instant. And that is what I'm excited about.
If I can just jump in, I think, for people who don't know, obviously, aside from owning the LA Times, you have made critical advances in cures for cancer. You and I have spoken about this previously, but just what is preventing a cure for cancer right now, and what's the government's role versus what should it be?
The irony, the reason I'm in Washington right now is actually I'm meeting with the FDA today to actually have this conversation. So in 2017, during President Trump's administration, I met with the FDA leadership, including Dr. Pazda, and says, we have this cure at hand. And the cure at hand is as follows. For 40 to 50 years, we've been following dogma in the treatment of patient cancer. You may know that everybody gets high-dose chemotherapy and high-dose radiation. Yet we now know, for the last 10 years, and that's been my basic research, that in your body, in all of us who are sitting here today, we have a cell that's floating around in our body called the natural killer cell. It's been built for over hundreds of millions of years to protect our body from cancer. And nobody's activated that natural killer cell. And we found a way to activate that natural killer cell. Now, the counterintuitively, the craziness is as soon as you give yourself high-dose chemotherapy, as soon as you give it one dose of radiation, you wipe out your natural killer cells. Think about that. We have inadvertently been actually wiping out our protective mechanisms and then having what we call micrometastasis, and then going from a curable disease to an incurable disease and saying, oh, sorry, you have metastasis, you now go to hospice. So let's give you more chemotherapy. The craziness of that, I've been fighting for 20 years of my life. Finally this year, our drug got approved. One of them, as you know, I developed Abraxane to get that approved. And then I got the second one called Anktiva that got that approved this year to activate your natural killer cells and your killer cells in your body. There's 3 more molecules that when you add to that combined, and the regulatory authorities fight and say, well, we don't want these combinations. Well, I said, well, which cell in your body don't you want? You have the natural killer cell, you've got the T cell, you've got the thing called the dendritic cell, you've got the macrophage, and they all work towards cancer and towards the cure. So we then instituted these trials across triple-negative breast cancer, metastatic pancreatic cancer, lung cancer, Merkel cell carcinoma. As you know, Senator Reid came to me when he had pancreatic cancer. We just published now metastatic pancreatic cancer, 5-year, patient still alive, unheard of. Triple-negative breast cancer, 2 years, lung cancer, etc. So we're going to the agency to say, look, we have this cure at hand. And finally, what was exciting, the National Cancer Institute used our molecules to try and prevent cancer. So 1 in 280 Americans have this syndrome called Lynch syndrome. Some of you don't know it, in which you have an 80% increased chance of colon cancer, breast cancer, ovarian cancer. And our trial has now been instituted. 100 patients have been enrolled using this molecule that got approved together with a vaccine, a cancer vaccine. So I think taking away this sort of dogma and this regulatory dogma and this physician dogma and the perverse incentives of putting on high-dose chemotherapy, making money out of these pharmaceutical agents. Again, I'm excited by this administration coming in. We have competence. I think I tweeted about, it was an inspired decision by Robert Kennedy to have hired 3 doctors into the FDA, CMS, and CDC, because they've touched patients. They understand patients. They understand what the patients need. And this is all about the patients. And if we have the regulatory bodies understand this is about the patients, this is not about checking the box, I think we'd be better off as a nation.
Dan.
You're curious if you know and have a relationship with and thoughts on a fellow Angeline, Robert F. Kennedy, and his nomination. What are your thoughts on him?
You know, I think people misunderstand Bobby Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy. He's really all about the science. I've sat down with him, met with him for the first time. I've not known him until I sat down with him, because I wanted to understand what he was thinking. And after hours of sitting down with him, I was so impressed. He knows more about the science than most doctors. What he says, let me give you some examples about this red dye, blue dye, etc. I tweeted, that's been published for 12 years in very reputable journals that they're carcinogenic. Now think about this. We know for 12 years they're carcinogenic. The Europeans know they're carcinogenic. Guess what the Europeans do? They ban it. So I went to London and found a food, a candy, and called I won't name the company so I don't get them into trouble. The candy and the company, the same candy in the US, and I put them together. The UK, zero food coloring. Coloring comes from vegetables, beets, etc. In the US, it's all this red dye, blue dye. Why do we allow, when we know scientifically that there's carcinogens in the things we're giving to our children, and in the UK and Europe, they banned it, but we allow it? Why? Now, I said, why don't we just say that? When he talks about vaccines and the polio vaccine, etc., the word goes out. There's no way he wants to ban the polio vaccine. He's talking about some of the old versions of it that happen to have mercury in it. We all know there's mercury that causes deficiencies. And if you can take the mercury out, which you know you can, and they've done. So again, people conflate this politically. So I'm here to say that not only I've sat down with him, heard him, completely understand the science that he's worried about. Now we talk about the COVID vaccine. What he's worried about, and I was worried about, and we have that as maybe a separate discussion one day, during the Trump administration, Sean, and you were there during that time, they did an amazing job in creating this COVID vaccine quickly so we can actually reduce death. Fine. But there was also another opportunity to have a better vaccine that would clear the virus. So to most lay people, they don't understand what it means to clear the virus, meaning you can get an infection and not die because you mitigated it with these antibodies. But unless you then clear it from your body, then you're going to have long COVID. Now we have 16 million Americans with long COVID. People know about long COVID. It's like saying you're going to have hepatitis. Well, you want to clear that virus. It's like saying you have HPV, you want to clear that virus. It's like saying you have HIV, you want to clear that virus. And we'll talk about at some point during the Biden administration, again, when this vaccine was available to clear the virus, it didn't go through. So this idea of the effectiveness and safety of the vaccines is real science. We need to talk about it. And guess what? Not only are we going to have two big crises about the recovery of California over the next decade, but we're going to have to address the rising incidence of cancer. For the first time in my career, I've seen an 8-year-old, 9-year-old, 10-year-old with colon cancer. The first time in my career, I've had a 13-year-old child in our clinic die of metastatic pancreatic cancer. We have to face this effectiveness and face reality. The good news is that we can do something about it. The good news now, there are effective therapies because we understand the science in such an immense way, including with AI today. So again, I'm excited about this next 4 years of bringing this information across, and not to scare the population, to say, look, we could lead the world in our innovation and using healthcare as a foreign policy around the world.
Doctor, with so many topics, we want to talk to you about more about cancer and also about journalism, but I want to bring that two-way community in. So we're going to start taking questions from folks. Man knows a lot, so you can probably ask him just about anything, but if you can, stick to the fires and science and journalism for now. And let's start with Patty. Patty, tell folks who don't know, after you unmute, where you are and what's on your mind. One more time. There you go. Nope. Patty, you're still not muted. Unmuted. One more time. All right. Patty's going to work on it.
I think I did it.
There you go, Patty. Go ahead.
Sorry.
That's good. That's all right. Tell folks where you are and what's on your mind.
I'm in Michigan, but I was a resident of Los Angeles for more than 40 years and worked for, this is an ad, I don't know if you can see it from the LA Times. I was on the Los Angeles Olympic Organizing Committee, worked with the LA Times. I was in public relations. I just want to say I've almost cried during your presentation. I think you are absolutely, doctor. Somebody called in the midst of this horrible fire. There's going to be such good about your coming into prominence right now. I think you have so much to contribute to not only Los Angeles, but to the world. So I'm just really very honored to have this platform at this very moment. I think that Los Angeles, they talked about Netanyahu's lack of imagination on October 7th. I think lack of imagination is just almost ridiculous to talk about in terms of the LA fires. It was imaginable, a catastrophic fire. And I think, and I think you're beginning to grapple with it, but I think there is an absolutely tremendous role the LA Times is going to be able to play in all this. I took a course at UCLA many years ago that was called, "Is California a one newspaper state?" That to me reflected the importance of the LA Times throughout California. And I think it could still be true, that fact. And you're naming some things, but I think there are probably many resources that you can provide because you have the imagination that you could provide to the citizens in terms of missing persons, homes that have been destroyed, some kind of a storehouse of information. What are, and you've kind of alluded to it, but where do you see, are there any limits to what you're seeing in terms of you can do, or?
No,
Great question, Patty. Thank you, Doctor.
well, first of all, thank you for the compliment. I appreciate that. Let me speak to it, because I think the opportunity now for us to use technology, and I don't mean technology and sort of the Silicon Valley technology, practical technology. So for the first one, we're creating interactive maps right now of where you are and where there's somebody doing a little food bank, just so you can go there, where you can go pick up clothing, where, etc., or where you can get some healthcare, etc. So that's one of the things we're creating as we speak. So there's interactive. That's what I'm trying to make the LA Times paper a utility, a resource to go to, as well as information to learn from. So that's one of the opportunities. The other one is exactly this council, because it'll require large amounts of investment from the private sector to actually recover the community, together with going to President Trump and the federal government coming in. Sean and Dan and Mark, this is really an opportunity, and I don't want to be political, but for a Republican opportunity, I mean, it's been a blue state, a deep, deep, deep blue state, to come in and show that you really can help the people. So one of the things, let me give you some massive examples. You can't fight fire without water, but we have now cyclical, huge rain, and then huge drought. Well, part of this whole issue of climate change we're going. We have to accept there is climate change. We're beyond 1.5 degrees centigrade. When we have these huge rains, crazy, we just let millions, maybe billions of gallons run off into the ocean. You need infrastructure to capture the water. So you can't fight fire without water. On the other hand, fire can't fight fire without brush. So have goats. And the third thing, this is retardant. So there is now a thing called graphene, and come from graphite, that has now, we've developed this, and in which we've created, just with water, zero chemicals, graphene, which is a pure fire retardant. So now make roofs painted with graphene. These are very practical, large private equity, corporate infrastructure, where these things could help. So places like Walmart, Kroger's, Disney, could they have spots where people can get information, help, even stations, etc.? So there's very practical, pragmatic, and I'm sad to say, business-like ways which we have to go about it, and involve even private equity. So, Mark, if you ask who else is we're inviting private equity to come in, to come into this council, because that's really what we need to do, and then use the LA Times, both podcasting and streaming, and the studio, to inform both the community and as well the corporations of the country, where they can help.
Patty, go ahead real quick.
Real quick, is there a way for you to become a part of the information press conferences that the city is holding? Because I think there is a tremendous role that you're playing with information. These conferences seem to lack real hardcore useful information. Have you thought about or approached the city, or would you?
I think I'm better served doing podcasts like this.
Patty, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Patty,
No, I don't mean that. I mean that because I think it's now time. I want to talk to the people in real ways. So, for example, I was just shown that LA Times is now listed a place where you can get discounted food and things like that. That's today. So rather than having platitudes, to be not disparaging in these conferences, and people talking about we here for you and we here for the people, and okay.
Yeah. Patty, thank you. Doug Workman lives in Southern California. Doug, have you been affected by the fires?
Fortunately not. If you look out my window, you can see the smoke from the Eaton fire to the east, and you can see the Palisades fire to the south. I've had cousins had to evacuate. I've had friends who were staying at our house because they were living in the evacuation zone in Santa Monica. My office is about 2 miles from the evacuation zone in Santa Monica, so I've been working from home for the last few days. I have to say, Dr. Soon-Shiong, you sound like a breath of fresh air. I wish I'd been reading the LA Times. I haven't read it in a decade because of its anti-Israel stuff, and probably wouldn't subscribe until I got convinced that there was some objectivity there. I do have a question for you, though, and that is, I belong to an ABA real estate lawyers forum called DIRT. And on that forum, there have been nothing but discussions about the impediments that California imposes on rebuilding, using prior fires as an example. I have to say, this is not a two-party problem in this state. And we have tremendous impediments. What are we going to do to rebuild to make that permitting and improvement process, accessible and doable? Because otherwise, we're going to be slowed down by years. Particularly, the Palisades is in a coastal area. The Coastal Commission is just like the biggest impediment to anything.
Doug, thank you for the question. And maybe if the answer is good enough, you'll become a subscriber again. Go ahead, Doctor.
With regard to the issues of regulatory authorities, there's this thing called CEQA and the thing called California Coastal Commission and permitting. I think we continue to support the permitting for safe, because look, the next strategy is going to be earthquake. So from that perspective, but the CEQA and the Coastal Commission regulatory authorities, I think I hear that they're working towards actually reducing that or allowing that to happen. I think we also need insurance reform a little bit. I mean, I think the ability, and now it becomes a sort of self-fulfilling cycle, because now insurance companies don't want to insure. And if you don't have insurance, and how look at some of the people that actually now have home insurance. Look, I want to address, and I don't want to make this political, but the issue of writing about the humanitarian issues of doctors and press people getting killed in Gaza is not an anti-Israel thing. But we won't even address that at this call. I think I'm a doctor at the end of the day, and when I see what the Doctors Without Borders are getting killed, it's very painful. So but we won't address it. I don't think that's an appropriate discussion today, but at least I hope you will support the paper.
Well, we'll come back into a 7-hour episode on the paper in Israel, and Doug can co-host it with you and see if we get him to be a subscriber. Doug, thank you. Grateful to you. Peter, welcome in. Please tell folks where you are, what's on your mind.
Hi, thanks for allowing me to hop in. Yeah, I'm in Washington, D.C., originally from Michigan. I was going to ask about permitting and the whole YIMBY set of issues and housing and such, but that was just asked. But something that this program alerted me to is the Trump administration's interest in dealing with urban issues, with the problems of great American cities such as Los Angeles and, Washington, D.C., where I live, and New York. And I'm just curious, Dr. Soon-Shiong, from your perspective, what can the federal government do on issues of crime, homelessness, other issues of urban livability that are really local in nature and governance, but nonetheless, 3 in 10 people in Los Angeles County voted for Trump, and I think a large part of that was dissatisfaction with the status quo. And I'm just curious, what would a new administration be able to do in this regard?
So let me give you again the practical things I tried to do with the current administration in California. I toured Gavin Newsom and I toured Karen Bass 3 years ago to a piece of property that sadly I had to inherit, called the St. Vincent's Medical Center downtown, the poorest hospital managing the poorest of the poor in LA. What happened was I tried to take over these Daughters of Charities hospitals that were going bankrupt to help the poorest of the poor. And the Attorney General really didn't help us then. He happened to be called Javier Becerra, who is now HHS Secretary. Really didn't really help us in that regard. So those hospitals went bankrupt and I took over that piece of property. That piece of property, with the hospital no longer being a hospital, could serve as a mental health institution for all the homelessness, and not only have mental health care, but also physically break down a wall between 2 hospital rooms with the bathroom, and you right there, a massive kitchen, etc. No action, 0 action. We spent money putting people into hotels, buying a hotel at $200,000. And so that is what I mean by competence. I don't know the motivation of not doing something at the core root of that. It still stands empty. That piece of property still stands empty. With regard to the federal government, this federal government now can really say, look, we'll come in and help the urban, but why do we need billions of dollars for a bullet train to Las Vegas? Think about that. What are we spending billions of dollars with a bullet train to Las Vegas, that for which no tracks have yet been laid, but we spend hundreds of millions of dollars? I'm so proud of it as a sort of showcase when we have reservoirs that are empty. So this is the craziness of the frustration when and you're right, I've been involved in the community because I love Los Angeles. My kids grew up in Los Angeles. I evacuated this weekend, so I have personal knowledge of what it means. But quietly, I've been working with both local, county, and state government for 10 years. And the level of frustration grows and grows. Mark Ridley Thomas I worked with to try and create Martin Luther Hospital, which we did. But as you could see, there's levels of issues, better way for me to say it, that's involved with some of these officials that is beyond my pay grade. All I can do is come forth with some solutions. And now it gets more critical. Now it was time for me to really, I've just used the X or Twitter now for the first time in any real meaningful way, and come into audiences like this so that we can talk about it, because really it's too dangerous to wait and to not speak out.
Peter, thank you. Doctor, how do you see your role in working to revitalize the paper with your obvious interest in being a public voice and being involved in public policy discussions? How do you see those two combined?
I'm not sure if I'm interested in being a public voice. That's the first thing. I am interested in using the paper as the public voice. I think I do things best just quietly working with people behind the scenes and helping them get things done. But I do think it's important for the paper to be a public voice. So where I'm working on the paper is not a paper, meaning it's now a media platform, not a paper platform. So we're going to, for example, we've opened a thing called LA Times Studio. We're now partnered with Spectrum. We're doing real-time broadcasting. We're actually about to build podcasts. We're doing interactive interactions. We created the whole mobile platform. One of the things that when I bought the paper 8 years ago, 6 years ago, forget the time now, was I said the content management system is archaic. So we built from scratch, just like electronic medical records, using all my knowledge of the healthcare to build a content management system that can integrate podcasts, videos, interactions, mobile devices, real time. I'm going to even have the paper be a utility where you could actually have what you call your health vault, where you can interact with your doctor, where you can actually get lower cost medical care, where you can get prescription drugs. I can only do what I know on a personal basis, and which is really both healthcare and now I'm trying to address climate change. The other opportunities, we've been working with artificial intelligence, I call augmented intelligence, for decades. So we've created a machine learning tool. If you go onto the website called Nant Mobile, N-A-N-T Mobile, it's old, it's dead, because in 2012, if you go and you'll see a video where I used a camera and any image became the video of that episode in LA Times. I brought it to LA Times then in 2012. Obviously, I didn't own it. And they said, don't be stupid. Who's going to look through a camera of a phone? Nobody will do that. So it doesn't help to be a little ahead of your time. But that video you can see on Nant Mobile. We just left the website up, and you'll see all a bunch of AIs. So interactive, and then you need to go to the Gen Z. You need to find ways that it can read news beyond TikTok, where they can read news beyond the Instagram feed, and how can you differentiate from fake news, deep fake news, and real news, right? Finally, I think, look, the layperson doesn't understand the difference between an editorial, an opinion, a columnist, and news. And I'm trying to differentiate it explicitly and said, listen, this is news, and this is what I call a voice. And you're allowed to have a voice. You can be left voice, right voice, middle voice, but at least your voice. But we need to explicitly say that this is a voice. So that's step one I'm doing. I got a lot of pushback about talking about that, but I think it's important that the layperson understands this is an opinion. So that's one of the things I'm trying to do, and that'll be coming out soon. The next thing is within the opinion, the article itself has a perspective. Now, you may, just as I had this gentleman on the call before, he may have his perspective of how and why we write about Gaza and Israel. And he has a complete right to have that perspective. But the article itself, through AI, and we've got a lot of AI underpinning this, and we're working through it, machine learning, reading, deductive reasoning, very complex AI, is that article by sentence, by word, written from a right, middle, left perspective. If you call yourself a craven coward, what do you actually mean by a craven coward? So these are the kinds of things that we're trying to bring in, really to inform the reader, to better inform the reader. We have no position, right or left. We should have no position, right or left. I took the position for the endorsement or absence of endorsement of Kamala, that we should not do that. I accept that, and I think it was the right call. But at least that was an editorial position. I don't think the lay audience understands the difference, unless you're a news person, of editorial opinion, op-ed, and news. News should just be facts.
Yeah. And Doctor, of course, as you know, a lot of your colleagues who run other newspapers and other news organizations don't seem to mind that there's a fuzziness there, and are happy having opinion in their news. We're very grateful to you for making time to join us. There's so many more topics we didn't get to we'd love to discuss with you, so we hope you will come back soon. But we're really pleased that, as busy as you are able to spend this hour with us. So thank you.
No, you're welcome. Good talking to you. Good seeing you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See
All
you.
right. Tonight, 9 o'clock. 9 o'clock sometime. 6 o'clock. All right. Let's talk about this first. Tonight, February 2nd, here in Washington, 5 p.m. local time. Sean, Dan, and I will be meeting, doing an event at Pearl Street Warehouse. Sean, what is the Pearl Street Warehouse?
The Pearl Street Warehouse is an amazing venue in the waterfront area of DC. It's if anyone's from down there familiar with like the Anthem, it's right down there in the heart of the new waterfront area. A phenomenal venue. May or may not have hosted a book event for someone in the not so distant future. Great venue to see live acts. And I think if you've been to the one that we held in New York or watched it, very similar type venue. It's going to be intimate. It's going to be fun, exciting. So if you want to book your tickets now, come on. If you're in the DC area, we'd love to have you.
So go on twoway.tv on the web, and you can read more about the event and buy tickets. We'd love to see you.
I think, by the way, all of us, just so one other, I think Dan, you and myself, we've all either retweeted your tweet, Mark. So if you're just go to any one of our feeds, you'll see Mark's initial tweet that has a link to getting tickets.
Yeah.
And for all the football fans, we are in between Super Bowl and conference championships that weekend. So
yeah, so it's free and clear. We look forward to seeing you. Thank you for buying tickets. Tonight, 6 p.m. Eastern time, I'll be here with Two Way Tonight, and we have great guests. Did I mention our great guests? We have Democrat Melissa DeRosa and Republican Kristen Davison, two mainstays of this platform. We'll talk about the news of the day, including the latest developments in the fire and on Capitol Hill and the confirmation process. Please join us then. And the three of us will be back tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Eastern time, for another edition of this program. Goes by the name, The Morning Meeting. Thank you for watching. Thanks again to our great guest, and we'll see you tomorrow, and I'll see you tonight at 6.